Okay, so I want to begin with a moment, with a prayer for our brothers and sisters in Israel. Just figure out why this is not broadcasting. Okay, it is working. Okay. Just with a prayer for our brothers and sisters in Israel, for their safety and success of the IDF. Sh'amalis l'David lula adinei shayalanu yamerna Yisrael lula adinei shayalanu b'kum aleinu adam azachayim b'lu'unu b'charis apam banu azai hamayim shetufunu nachla v'ar nafshenu azai v'ar nafshenu hamayim azidoinim baruch adinei shleinu sanonu teref l'shneim nafshen ketziprinim latim v'achiyekshenu v'achnishra v'nachim latnu azenu b'shem adinei s'shemayim v'aretz. A song of ascents by David. Were it not for the Lord who was with us, let Israel declare, were it not for the Lord who was with us, when men rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us alive, and their burning rage against us, then the waters would have inundated us. The torrent would have swept over our soul, and the raging waters would have surged over our soul. Blessed is the Lord who did not permit us to be prey for their teeth. Our soul is like a bird which has escaped from the fowler's snare. The snare broke, and we escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And also would like to wish a happy Father's Day to all the fathers, those who will become fathers, those who have fathers, etc., etc. All right, new discourse today. So welcome to New Faces. And so we are going to be studying the principle of faith versus knowledge, or knowledge versus faith. And we will do our best to confuse things first before we unclutter them and get clarity. So like all the discourses, they're based on a verse. This verse is at the beginning of Deuteronomy, where the verse says, and you want to follow along, we're on page 3, V'yadaita hayom v'ashevaisa elavavecha. Moses instructs the Jewish people prior to their entering the land of Israel, and he says, and you should know today and take to heart, Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that God, or Hashem, is the God, Vashamayim mimal, on the heavens above, V'ala aretz mitachas, on the earth below, Ein od, there is none else other than him. The emphasis here is on the instruction, and you should know today. So we obviously need to understand, what does that mean to know God, to know this principle? But before we get there, the Alter Rebbe has another question. We read earlier on in these very verses, it says, Ata hareisa ladas, you were shown. Moshe is, just context, this is the end of Moses' life. The Jewish people are going to be entering into the land of Israel a short while after Moses' passing. And this is essentially his last will and testament, his final instruction to the people. And so he's recounting the events that they experienced. He's highlighting the challenges that they posed to God. He's highlighting God's kindness to awaken within them an appreciation and a gratitude for the unique gift of being the Jewish people and the empowerment that God empowered them with. So in the earlier verse, it says, you have been shown at Mount Sinai, at the revelation at Sinai, God showed you that Hashem is true. Ki Hashem hu Elokim, that Hashem is God. Ein od movade, there is none other than him. So why a few verses later is the Torah giving the instruction, and you should know? Moshe already said you were given to know at Mount Sinai, God made it known to you. So what is this instruction, and you should know? So you might even say this is a technical question. It seems redundant. Moses already said that God showed you and made you know, or helped you know. So what's the additional instruction here, and you should know? Okay, so that's question number 1. Page 4, question number 2, Gam mahu hayoim. It says, V'yadaita hayoim, and you shall know today. What is this instruction about knowing today? What is today about? Now, you're going to answer that it's a technicality. He's giving them instruction for what's taking place in front of them right there at the moment. But there's something more. The words in the Torah are not extra. So if Moses is giving an instruction you should know today, there's something very specific that he's trying to identify and delineate that we need to understand what is the meaning behind that. Okay, so that's scene one. Scene two, as with everything and often with the Alter Rebbe, after we have our first question, we have to ask another question on a different topic, which then ultimately will bring it back around. Let him know that the door is open. All right, he'll figure it out. So what took place at Sinai? At Sinai, there was a profound divine revelation. And morning. So at Sinai, there was a profound divine revelation. And it was too intense. It was too intense for the people. Right? God is revealing himself to the people. And the finite human has limited capacity to experience divine revelation. Right? What is the term we use today? I'm flooded. Right? You get flooded. You get flooded with emotions. What does it mean you get flooded with emotions? Sometimes the emotions are overwhelming to the point that you can't think. You can't even decipher what the emotions are, right? In other words, the human capacity for emotions is limited itself. To even experience emotions is limited. And now we're saying we want to experience something that's outside of the human capacity altogether because it's infinite, right? The revelation of God is an infinite revelation. Emotions are finite, and even emotions we have a hard time containing, let alone to experience something that's infinite. It's impossible for us to contain that. So what happens when you experience emotions that are overwhelming? You go a little meshuggah, you crack up a little bit, right? Or else you got to retreat from the emotions. So when the Jewish people stood at Sinai and they experienced this divine revelation, they said to Moses, tell God that's enough. We can't handle that. It's too much for us. These are the words in the verse here. Look in the second paragraph on page 4. They said, if we continue to hear God speaking, vamasnu, we will die. The human body cannot contain such an infinite experience. So if we continue to hear God speak, we're going to die. So therefore they gave Moses the following request. Krav ata ushema eskal asher yomer Hashem Elokeinu. You draw near to God. Apparently you've got the capacity to speak to God. So you go to God, you talk to him, you gather the information, and you'll pass it on to us. And we will hear what God instructs us, and we will do it. And here's the fascinating thing. God agreed with them. God said, okay, fine. I won't reveal myself anymore to you. I'll communicate through Moses. As the verse says, Heitivu kol asher diberu, everything they said was proper, and therefore, Leich amar lahem, you go and tell them that they should return to their tents. You're going to stay here with me. I will give you, God speaking to Moses, I will give you the instructions of the commandments and the statutes and so on, and you will teach it to them. Right? So these are the historic events that are documented in the Torah. And then it says, V'zois ha-mitzvah, achukim hashpatim asher siva Hashem Elokeinu lamed eschem, laseis ba'aretz, eretz zavas chalav davash, And subsequently, Moses then indeed instructs the people regarding the commandments that they need to observe, as it says, to fulfill in the land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, but this is the evolution that's taking place here. God reveals himself at Sinai. They say this revelation is too intense. Good morning. Good morning. The revelation is too intense, and we want you to speak to God, and then you'll pass on the word to God. And indeed, God agrees to that. Moses then subsequently gives the people the instruction, everything that they need, all the laws, the commandments that they need to observe when they enter into the land. And then immediately after that, we have the instruction, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is the first commandment that the Jewish people received from Moses after the instruction of the 10 Commandments. Okay, so we got a lot going on here. Let me unpack it. This is a little technical, but we'll get into the meat of it in a minute. The verses seem to give us the following flow. Moses recounting what transpired. There's a revelation at Sinai. Revelation's too intense. The people say to Moses, this is too much for us. You go and ask God to communicate to you, and you'll communicate to us. And Moses goes to God. God says, okay. And then Moses goes ahead and he says, and these are the commandments that you will observe when you enter into the land flowing with milk and honey. And then he says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's the sequence of events. Now, the instruction, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, which is a commandment of faith, right? That's an instruction. Shema Yisrael, listen, Israel. It's an instruction. What is the instruction? To recognize that there's one God. It's an instruction. It's a commandment of faith. That commandment is dependent whether we are in the land of Israel or not in the land of Israel. And it's what is called in Talmudic language, chayvas haguf. It is an obligation of the person. In other words, leaving a tithe or leaving the corner of your field for the poor is an obligation of the object. The object requires that you tithe it. The tzitzit that we wear, a four-cornered garment has an obligation to put the tzitzit on it, the strings on it. I don't have an obligation to wear tzitzit. I have an obligation that if I put on a four-cornered garment, that I put tzitzit on the four-cornered garment. Now, it is our practice to wear tzitzit all the time anyway. But the obligation is that if I put on a four-cornered garment, to put strings on it. So there are certain, but the faith in God is independent of anything around me. I have an obligation to believe in one God. So all these commandments that Moses is giving to the people have to do with the land of Israel. And the proof is because they're only obligated in them once they enter into the land of Israel. So when they're not in the land of Israel, they're not obligated in them. So why didn't he first instruct them regarding the commandment of faith, the commandment of Shema Yisrael, which is obligatory upon the individual, whether they're in the land of Israel or not in the land of Israel? Just in a sequence, that should have come first. So that's, again, it's a technical question, but it's all going to factor in. So we have, to summarize on page 5, we have 3 questions. Question number 1 is, why do we need to know that Hashem is the one and only God if God already showed that to us at Mount Sinai? Question 1. Question 2, why today? Why is Moses' instruction and you should know today? What's specific about today? Number 3, why is the Shema the first mitzvah that Moses commands us to fulfill in the land of Israel? What connection does the saying of the Shema have to do with the land of Israel? So to answer these questions, the Alter Rebbe begins with explaining the mitzvah, or the meaning of knowing versus the meaning of faith, believing. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of it. To understand this, we have to understand what is the idea of knowing, knowledge, and what is the idea of faith, which are clearly two separate commandments. How do we know they're two separate commandments? So if you look on page 6, he quotes two verses. Know the God of your father. Right? What does it mean to know? The Ritzayin Lemar is das v'asaga mamish, actual knowledge and comprehension. Conversely, uksiv vayaminu b'Hashem. In another verse, it says, "And you should believe in Hashem." So let's take a minute just to engage in some discussion. What does knowledge mean, and what does faith mean? What does knowledge mean to you, and what does faith mean to you? And how do we apply that to an understanding of a God who is seemingly beyond knowledge? Okay, so knowledge is something we can see and touch. Faith is something we cannot see. Okay? I'll come back to that in a minute. Anybody else? When you think about knowledge, knowing something, what does that mean for you? And when you think about believing in something, what does that mean for you?
Believing, you will be having faith as well, because you're believing in something, right? So you need, in order to believe in something, you need to have faith.
Good. So what do you choose to believe in, and what do you choose to know? Or maybe it's not a question of what you choose, but what can you believe in, and what can you know?
You know facts and figures. But when somebody says, I believe in you, that means I believe in something beyond facts. So in terms of how it relates to God, we obviously know what's been passed down from Moshe, that was described, writing down Hashem's revelation. Beyond that, I guess we gotta go with that's to emphasize. It goes falls in one question.
Yeah, you're all touching on the same thing, but I want to challenge something you said. Just not that I disagree. I want to dig a little deeper. So when you say knowledge is what's been passed down to us, does that mean that we know it? And vis-a-vis God, what does that mean that we know just because it was passed down to us? How does that make us know it?
We can see the effect of that now. We're told like we have a beating heart. You can see it on the surface. So it's proof, so to speak. Whereas faith is something like you said, you believe in, but we're unable to demonstrate it or support it with data.
Good. So you're splitting the knowledge a little bit, the comment about knowledge a little bit more. You're saying that knowledge is something that we can see, or we have proof of it enough that we can know it. Whereas faith is something that we can't see, we can't know it. So our relationship to it is one of believing in it. Right? Because I don't know it, so what do I have left? I have only a belief in it. I like how you said, I believe in you, even though I don't know that you have the capacity that I'm saying that I believe in, but I believe in your potential.
It's like you don't know how many times I wake up sometimes in the middle of myself, what is space and time? I only know as much as the Hubble and James and all these other guys can see, or whatever. But it's kind of weird. Yeah, and I watch Star Trek, they go through the ends of it.
So you know as far as you can know, and then beyond that, you believe.
Based on trust. When you believe your parents when you're younger because you trust them. Sometimes you see evidence of the opposite later in life. So you think, okay, maybe that wasn't true what they were telling me. But I had faith in them in the beginning because trust in them. I have faith in God because there's a level of trust there.
I think that faith and trust are two separate things. It's you may trust someone based on knowledge, especially as we will dig deeper in explaining what knowledge is. Because I know something, let's use one of the examples that was given here. I can I see certain things that have happened that you've demonstrated. You've demonstrated that in all the business deals you've done until now, you've showed up with integrity. So I trust, right? That's my knowledge. So I trust based on that you are going to have integrity in the deal that we're about to make together, right? A child perhaps has knowledge that he sees that his parents feed him and, raised him until the state of consciousness, that self-awareness the child has now arrived to. And therefore he trusts, so that's knowledge. He's making an evaluation that based on that evaluation, the information that I have, I'm drawing a conclusion that it's worth trusting that they're going to continue to deliver on that. That's a good equation to make, right? Like you said, sometimes because humans are fallible, parents don't necessarily deliver on that. But at the moment, that was the right thing to do. Versus, we read about children who grow up in homes where it's not trustworthy. They don't trust their parents, and they lack a lot of stability in their lives because they grow up in an environment where they saw that their parents didn't feed them and didn't take care of them and didn't show up, and therefore they didn't trust their parents. So they, a child needs to have that trust, needs to have that safety, and they didn't have it. But my point is that there is knowledge. It's not necessarily that the child makes the intellectual evaluation on a spreadsheet, but inherently the child has the knowledge based on what they're experiencing that leads them to the conclusion that it's worth trusting, that this is trustworthy. Faith is something else. And actually, this was a good segue because the Alter Rebbe, I think at its core, what is knowledge? Knowledge is seeing something. I think you mentioned that, seeing something. You don't have to be convinced that it is. I see it. I know it is. So knowledge is much more about a feeling than it is about surrender. Knowledge is much more of a feeling than it is about the intellectual components that birth it.
Say that knowledge is sort of more of a choice, whereas faith, or like knowing something, believing something is more of like a choice, whereas knowing something is just something that happens, you don't choose to know or not.
Well, I think the first part of what you said I would agree with, that believing is something, in a sense, it's a choice, right? We believe that we have inherent within us faith, but the way it shows up is not necessarily integrated, right? It's at our core, but it's not necessarily integrated naturally into our emotions and our thoughts and our experiences. We have to lean into that. But it is, in a sense, transcendent. Whereas knowledge is something we can choose to develop. That's where I would deviate from what you said. It's a choice. We can collect information, right? So if I were to tell you that the room is black right now, and I say the sun is shining outside, and you don't know because you've been stuck in this dark, blackened room for some extended amount of time, and I say the sun is shining outside, and you're not trapped in here. You can walk outside and see the sun, and you say, well, I believe that's true. That's not really good belief. That's not mature belief. Why? Because you can walk to the door, open the door, and you can see that the sun is shining, and you don't need to believe it. You can see it. You can know it, right? But if I tell you to believe, like Payman was saying, if I tell you to believe that the universe is ever expanding, right? Even science doesn't know that as a matter of knowledge. They have scientific theory, right? The only way they can know it as a matter of knowledge is if they have some piece of technology that's situated at the end of the expanding universe, and they see it literally expanding in front of them. Other than that, they have scientific theory that therefore leads them to a conclusion that this is happening. Well, we can only know the part of it that we can know, but then at a certain point, the knowledge runs out, and we have to have faith. So, what in the human experience, do you believe that you're alive, or do you know that you're alive? Does anybody want to say we believe that we're alive? Just for fun, to have dissenting opinions. So we know that we're alive. Does a 10-year-old child know that they're alive? Do you have to be a medical scientist to know that you're alive, to understand what the mechanisms are? You don't need that. You wake up in the morning, no one has to convince you of anything. You know that you're alive, right? That's knowledge. It's not intellectual. It's a sense, it's a feeling. It's a total feeling of knowing that this is what it is. I'll tell you a story. I heard this last night. Sapir Cohen. Anybody know who that name is? So, my brother-in-law shared this story with me last night. So he went to Israel, I guess it would have been in March. And they went to the Tel HaShomer hospital in Tel Aviv, where the wounded soldiers come and where they have their rehab. I've had the privilege to visit there as well. And he's sitting there. It's a little bit of a long story. I'll try to make it brief. So he's sitting there with a soldier, an amputee, and one of the people from his community. He's a Chabad rabbi in Boca Raton, and he's sitting there with this amputee, and they're talking to him. And this woman walks into the room, and she gives the soldier a book of Psalms, and she introduces herself and tells her story. Her name is Sapir Cohen. Sapir Cohen, about a month before October 7th, had this premonition that something bad was going to happen. And she went to her rabbi, and her rabbi told her to say Psalms. And specifically, he instructed her to say Psalm 27, which is corresponded to her age group. And it's a very powerful psalm. We recite that psalm throughout the month of Elul, prior to the New Year, prior to Rosh Hashanah. We recite it through the high holiday season. It says Psalm by David, God is my light, my salvation, and so on. And then she and her boyfriend, Sasha, Russian fellow, were both taken hostage. And she recounts that during her time of captivity, the psalm, which she had said so many times already in advance of her captivity, kept her faith, kept her strong. Anyway, last summer, she was at the Jewish Learning Institute has a summer retreat, a learning retreat. There's 1,000 people come, and she spoke there. And at the retreat, she talked about her boyfriend and how she had faith that he was absolutely going to be freed. And now she's in the hospital visiting this patient, and her boyfriend is there. He was released, Sasha, some months ago. And she's giving the soldier a book of Psalms, and she says that after she was freed from captivity, this philanthropist was so touched by her story that he had a special publication of the Book of Psalms printed called the Sapir Cohen edition. And he gave her these Psalms and he said, give them out to anybody who you feel can benefit from them. So she visits the hospital and she gives this to the soldiers. So this rabbi has with him this fellow from his community, and the guy is crying. Now, these are emotional interaction, but he's crying uncontrollably. So after everybody left, he turns to him and he says, what's the story here? So he said that last year at that retreat, which he went to, and I heard Sapir speak, and she said that she had faith and that her boyfriend was going to be liberated. He said, I turned to my wife and they said, there's no way. They're going to kill him. They're going to murder him. And his wife turned back to him and she said, we don't talk like that. That's not the way Jews are. We have faith. We never give up faith. And he said to see right in front of him Sapir and Sasha, and this moment of faith being manifest was just totally overwhelming for him. Right? So this is the story. By the way, there are thousands and thousands of stories like this that are flying all over the place. Like, we're a miraculous people. But bringing it back to here, there was no knowledge here whatsoever. Nobody could have known a thing. If anything, if you wanted to look at statistics, you want to look at the circumstances, he was probably right in his analysis, right? The odds of Sasha being freed were 0 to none. But his wife said to him, that's not how we are. We believe. We have faith. Faith is not rational at all. Right? It's beyond comprehension. Knowledge, but faith is something we have to lean into, like you said. We have to lean into it. It's transcendent, but we have to lean into it. Knowledge is integrated. Something we feel. We feel it inside of us. I don't have to see the sun shining to know that the sun is shining. I know it. I don't have to see my heart beating to know that I'm alive. Right? Does this make sense? If you have questions or disagree, please. Open forum here. Yes. So that's the question. We have a knowledge of God through Torah. So then what is the mitzvah of belief? Where does the knowledge end? We have these two instructions. The Torah is clearly telling us two things. The Torah is telling us, if you look on top of page 6, two instructions. One is know the God of your fathers, and one is believe in God. So where does one end and where does one begin? And in order to know where one ends and where one begins, we have to first understand what are the properties of these two. So let's read a little further. V'inyan, middle of page 6. The idea is as follows. Ki be'emes zeh sha'olam kairim b'shem emunah lahamin masha kadosh baruch hu machayes kulam hu baras ha'olam es kol ha'olam es ma'in liyesh toyim heim shein tzarich lezeh emunah shar zeh nirgish bebechinas riyah. So the Alter Rebbe is going to turn this whole idea of faith upside down. When we say we believe that God sustains the world, right? You say, what is belief? I believe that God created the world. You don't have to believe that because you see that. Now, you say, I don't see that. I see a world, but your soul sees it. Your soul sees that God is the creator of the universe. Your soul sees that God constantly is giving life to the world. Your soul sees that because your soul is in a state of divine awareness. Now, your brain and your physical brain and your physical heart don't necessarily see it because they're physical. And they specifically conceal, the soul is inside of our body, concealed by the body. But that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean that the soul doesn't see it just because it's in a body. The soul never is limited. The soul itself is not limited by the body. The body is limited of the experience of the soul because of the body. right? It's like, maybe this is, I'm making this up, but I think it'll work. When you're in love with someone, it doesn't mean you're always in love with them. It doesn't mean you're always feeling the love towards them. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're always thinking about the love towards them. But if at any moment somebody says to you, do you love your spouse? Do you love this person? Your answer is going to be absolutely. Are you feeling it right now? No, I don't have to feel it right now. I know that I love them. That's inherent to my connection with them. There are times where I'm thinking about it more. There are times where I feel it more. But my love is there. It's a given. The soul being in our body knows a fact because it sees it. It's right in front of it. It sees godliness. So the soul always knows that God is the creator and that God is sustaining the world. Now, for us, the human, the body side of us, needs to peel away the layers to tap into that knowledge of the soul. But the soul knows that. Because it's as much as me looking and seeing the sun. I know that the sun is shining. It's looking at my body and knowing that I'm alive. I don't have to feel it. I don't have to think it. I know it. Right? So that's Dr. Rebbe is telling us is that that's not really a good use of the word faith. Hagam she'einu roeh b'einei basar, even though the person cannot physically see this, because it's the soul that sees that reality. Is a ki'ilu roeh. Using mental perception, the person can sense that the soul sees God and sees the creation, and therefore, by extension, it works. Regarding this, Job says, for my flesh, I can see God. That's a biblical way of saying that the human is the microcosm, right? When we look at ourselves, we are able to then see the macro. We're able to understand the function of the universe. But spiritually, this verse is telling us is that God created us. We are the microcosm of the cosmos, the spiritual cosmos. So if we can understand the function of the human, we have a mirror to what's going on in the spiritual cosmos. So mibsari, echzeh daika, v'hainu mibsari, we can see, it doesn't say we can know, it says we can see. It doesn't say we can believe, it says we can see, like the soul sees, from my flesh. What does this mean? Next page. Shekamayish b'shvil sheroya chayes hagufa kiyumay yodeo margish kinav shehi boi shehi hamachayes gufu belada in chayes v'kiyum laguf, because just like it is with my flesh, with my body, that because I see my body's alive, I know that there must be a soul inside of it. Right? I see I'm alive. I see that I'm alive. I don't see my soul, but I see that I'm alive. Because I see that I'm alive, I know, without a doubt, that there is a soul that energizes, there's a life force that gives life to this living body. And that without that life force, the body wouldn't be alive. Right? You read those stories of people who get into a car accident, or God forbid, or something happens to them and they start wondering, am I alive or not? Why? Because they can't feel their body, right? As soon as they can't feel their body, they start wondering, wait, am I really alive? Am I not alive? A doubt sets in because they can't feel, they can't see. Their body is in a coma state, right? But if you see your body, or you wake up in the morning and even if you're laying in your bed, but you feel your heart beating, you feel your limbs, you're conscious of your being, you're alive. Even though you can't see your soul giving life to your body, you can't see the life force, you see the effects of the life force, so therefore you know categorically that you're alive. Yeah.
Issue the Israelites face when they were at Mount Sinai. Is it information overload on their bodies? Or is it the soul who wanted to gravitate towards Hashem?
So first, let me tell you what happened. What it says is that the soul, every time God uttered one of the 10 commandments, the souls left their body. which means their bodies, so everything requires, any light, any energy requires a receptacle, right? It needs something to contain it. I guess God lines things up for us. So we have a war going on right now. And really, at the end of the day, the war is on account of this fear of Iran using the bomb, the atomic energy, to create destruction. An atomic bomb is really, the function of the atomic bomb is the inability for a vessel to hold the energy. That's what creates the destruction, right? So the energy is released and there's nothing to hold it. And so it wreaks havoc everywhere, right? That's the power. But we see from there that energy requires a vessel. And when there's no vessel, the energy goes away. And it may create destruction along its way, or it just disappears, but every energy needs a vessel. Which, by the way, is a paradox that our bodies are a vessel for our soul. It's not, our bodies shouldn't really inherently be able to contain our soul, because they're not made up of the same material. Souls don't fit in bodies. Coffee fits in a coffee cup, but souls don't. They're made up of a different thing. They're an infinite energy placed into a finite entity. So why is it that the soul stays in the body? So the Medrash tells us that it's against our will we are born, and it's against our will that we die. Meaning, in a very general sense, it means that this whole thing is miraculous. It's paradoxical. So we live in this inherent state of tension because the soul doesn't want to be here, and the body knows that if the soul leaves, it loses its life force. So there's this constant tension between the two. Now, what happens? What happens is that God reveals himself at Sinai. So the soul, which is contained within the body in this kind of miraculous force, suddenly gets sucked out. It gets drawn to the light. That whatever the force, this divine force, right, that holds the body and soul together, doesn't have to be God's essence. Doesn't have to be the highest revelation of God. It's a power of God that holds these two things together. But when a power a dimension, a manifestation of God that's higher than that force reveals itself, it no longer works. Right? I mean, and you're a scientist a little bit, so you can, you have an energy that keeps the molecules together, right? What happens when something disintegrates? There's another energy, there's a greater energy that's more powerful than the energy that keeps those molecules together, that overrides that other energy, right? So you have an energy a divine energy that keeps body and soul together. At Sinai, there was a revelation of an energy that was far higher than that. It was the essence of God that was revealed at Sinai. When that happens, the soul leaves the body. The body can no longer contain it. So the vessel, which is a fine vessel, but it's only fine when it's tailored for the level of divine light, the level of the soul, that this energy that's designed to keep this paradox working works. But as soon as something more intense than that shows up, it disappears. You know when else this happens? At the moment of death. Right? We talk about the angel of death like the angel of death is a bad guy. He's not. He just has a bad reputation. Because when he leaves, people are unhappy. But the angel of death is an angel. We actually say a blessing when the angel of death comes. Blessed are you, God, King of the universe, who's the true judge. What does the angel of death do? So if you've ever been present when someone dies, you usually, even somebody who's in a state of a coma, right? So their heartbeat is pretty static, right? Very, very minimal. And then it becomes very erratic. You see it on TV also. It becomes erratic. Not that, art imitates life. It becomes very erratic, and then it flatlines. What's the erratic thing that's going on right prior to the flatlining? It's the fight between body and soul. The angel of death comes along. How does the angel of death take a soul? In other faiths, there's the guy with the pitchfork and a red cape, and but we don't believe in that. The angel of death comes along, and all he does is he increases the divine light, the frequency, right? Intensifies the divine frequency, and it's like you may have experienced this in ecstatic dance. Maybe you've experienced it with the help of other substances. Maybe you've heard a really good sermon. Maybe you were at a wonderful celebration. Whatever it is, we have moments where we get out of ourselves, right? We're getting excited about something. We're dancing. We're studying something that's so mind-boggling. Wow, it's so exciting. Or you're dancing on Simchat Torah, and the joy is so great, you forget about yourself, right? So what's happening is that the body is not holding your spirit in. Your spirit's able to express itself. Usually we stop at a certain point. The body doesn't let us get to that point. We get tired, or we calm down, you come back to our senses. But what happens, the angel of death is intensifying the light to the point that the body no longer can hold back. The body's holding on for dear life because it knows that as soon as the soul leaves the body, it's dead. And when it's dead, the body can't do mitzvahs anymore. It has no purpose on this earth anymore. So it fights for survival. Ultimately, the angel of death is going to win. But that's the erratic nature of the heartbeat. And then it flatlines because the angel of death wins and the person is left lifeless. So that's what took place at Sinai. The light was so great that their souls could not be contained by their body, even with the divine force that unites them together. It left its body, and then God restored it over and over again until they said, we can't do this. It's a pretty intense experience. A few times it was good, but that's it. It's like you can't enter into a state of ecstasy every single day. You definitely can't do it in one day 10 times. It's too much. And that's what they said to Moses. You bring the word to us. Okay, but let's get back to here. So just like we look at our body, it's actually maybe helped to understand a little bit, that we understand that we know that we have a life force inside of us. We have a spirit inside of us that gives life to our body. And without that spirit, there is no life. There's no continuous existence. Similarly, so too, like Job says, "Mibsari, from my flesh I see God." Now I can see God. You look at the worlds, you see that they're alive. We have a living organism around us. It didn't get here on its own. There's a life force that energizes it. The earth to heaven is a distance of 500 years, meaning we see this. There's this entity. There's this massive existence of a universe that has structure to it, has an ecosystem, has an integrated system of galaxies and so on. And by the way, this is the physical universe, but there's also a spiritual universe. Even the realm of the angels and the souls, they're also this massive spiritual organism. They are they're like a body in relation to the life force that energizes them, that give them their existence, that keeps them alive. Like it says, lift your eyes heavenwards and see who created these. In other words, that verse in Isaiah is telling us, lift your eyes heavenwards, not just around you in the physical reality, but look to the spiritual realms, and we also can see. We can see that there's an organism up there. Just like we see our body, we see life. We look at the world around us and you say, wow, this world is alive. It didn't just, you can tell me all the scientific stuff from today till tomorrow, which is all part of the master design, but there's an energy that energizes existence. And we know enough about angels and souls and so on to understand that there's also a life force that energizes the spiritual cosmos. So is this faith or is this knowledge? So he tells us, this knowledge, quote unquote, is felt, it's perceived by the person as if they see it. Which is why Job says, "Mipsari echze eleka." For my flesh, I perceive godliness. This is not called faith. This is not faith. This is knowledge. This is knowing. Now, even though a person is not, our knowledge of our soul in our body is more visible, so to speak, than the visibility of God in the physical universe around us and God in the spiritual cosmos, right? Because I can physically see my hands. I can touch my chest and feel my heartbeat, right? When I look at the trees, I have to lean into that. It's not a far stretch for me. Maybe a far stretch for a scientist, but on the contrary, I think the scientists, the more they dig in, the more they come to realize the truth, that there's something greater than what they're encountering. But regardless, it takes a little effort to see that in the tree, because we are seeing the tree, we're seeing the universe, let alone the spiritual universe, we're seeing it through our brain, our perception. That's how we are, that's the tool through which we're seeing it, even though ultimately what we're actually using to perceive it is our soul, which sees it without the filters. So we're trying to get to the soul through filters, but the soul sees it without filters. But all that is to say is that this is not faith. This is knowledge. This is seeing. So to use the term faith on something, as we said before, something that you can see, is not a correct use of the term. Faith has to be with something that's beyond. Let's finish this chapter. Kidas hu lashon hakara v'hargasha. The idea of knowing means recognition and awareness. V'gamdas hu hamakas halev shelo yasiach daita mizeh. The word knowing also implies, when I say that you are a knowing person, you know something, you don't know it now and not know it in an hour. If you know it, you know it. You may not be thinking about it in an hour, but you still have the knowledge around it, which means you're connected to the idea. You're connected to, you feel the thing, you feel the information, you see it. And you're inherently. This is not the case if one would only think about it superficially. It wouldn't accomplish anything, because thought is not considered like speech. So to fulfill the instruction to know God, one has to invest themselves until they come to a place of knowing. We have it inherently, but we have to invest ourselves to get to that place. So to what you said before, Peyman, in terms of, we have our tradition that passes this information down to us, but you can't plug in a USB and download it. I wish we could, maybe one day, but not yet. Right? So for now, we have to invest ourselves in acquiring that information. So we learn Kabbalah, we learn about the word of Hashem, the idea of creation ex nihilo, something from nothing. We learn about the power of light. We learn about this concept of vessels versus light. We learn about all of these things. And the more we learn about them, the more what we inherently see in our soul becomes integrated into our feeling, to the point that it's so real to us as it is the awareness that we're alive. So this is all knowledge. This is the mitzvah of knowing God. not the mitzvah of believing. Any questions on this? Yeah. How do you get there?
Yeah.
Got to take a supersonic jet. So it's hard for us to understand exactly what that means. We have a lot of these kind of descriptions in the teachings of our sages. It's not so much about the 500 years. What the point is that there's a measurement, and it's a spiritual measurement. We don't suppose that this instruction is that there's a distance of 500 years, that the concept of light years and so on. We're not talking about that, even though we understand such a thing, right? We know that the light that comes from the sun, by the time it reaches the earth, has already been traveling for X number of millions of light years, right? And we understand that even though the sun is so far away from us, that there's an infrastructure around the cosmos that allows for things to happen. Point being is that there's structure to it. It's not in a vacuum, right? That's the point. So why 500 years? I don't know offhand what the specific messaging. I'll give you another example. It says that the Torah preceded the world by 2,000 years. So his question is like, if there's no world, what is years? Before time, what is? So it says that the messaging there is that Torah is superior to the world, and the word for thousands in Hebrew or in Aramaic is alefcha. Alefcha means a chief. It's superior. It's chief over the world by 2,000 years, meaning that it precedes creation. The Torah has a superiority to creation over everything else. So when we talk, the messaging here is that just like we look at the body, do we understand everything about the body? No, but we understand that there's a mechanism here, there's an infrastructure here, and that this infrastructure is energized by the soul. There's a life force that energizes the body. The same thing, it's not such a stretch to look at the universe around us and see a body. The universe is a body. It's not a human body, but it's a body. It's an infrastructure. There's a system. There's a structure to all of the physical universe, the galaxies, the planets, the moons, the suns, nature. Everything is. It's easier for us to look at a sapling and see it grow into a tree and understand that there's a mechanism there. But it's not such a stretch for us to say that just like that tree has a certain natural mechanism to it, there's an infrastructure there, there's an infrastructure to the cosmos, the physical cosmos. And once we get there, we say, oh, I see that the physical cosmos I understand that there must be an energy that energizes it, even though I can't see the energy, just the way I look at my body and I don't see the source energy, but I see the manifestation. I take it to the next level, which is there must be a spiritual cosmos. There's angels and souls. And if there's angels and souls and there's a spiritual cosmos, that also is an infrastructure. And if that's an infrastructure, there's a life force that energizes it. That's knowing. That's not faith. I experience that. And if we invest ourselves in this knowledge and study it and read it and process it and think about it and meditate on it, it becomes even more real for us because we're peeling away the physical layers that prevent us from feeling the inherent experience of the soul, which is that the soul sees all of this naturally. So that's all knowledge. So where does faith come in? Come back next Sunday, you'll find out. Questions?
You make the argument that this is, the one-way screens, you can't see behind it, but it's a mirror. So can you make the argument that the soul is like a gigantic magnet inside the body? It's going, a gigantic metal inside the body, and then the nose, there's a magnet right here, even though you cannot see it. And it persuades the body, it's the nose, to follow its suit.
I love that. It's a great analogy. Yeah. I would take it a step further. The soul is connected. Despite the fact that it's in the body, it still is connected. It's not, the body doesn't interfere to its connection. So it's not a function, it's a function of dimension. In other words, your analogy is that there's two separate things that the body's in between. So the body gets swept along. Kabbalah tells us that there's nothing in between. Even as the soul is contained within the body, it is fully connected to God. So the body's disconnect is not in space, it's in consciousness, it's in dimension. Which means that the body has the ability to move into a different dimension to access the awareness of the soul, which is what we do on occasion, which is done to us on occasion, right? When we're forced into a moment of ecstasy or a spiritual experience, we tap into something that's there, which again, all of that contributes to the ability to the knowing, right? All of that taps into the knowing that there's something more here, without needing to, so to speak, convince ourselves or we just know it. Yeah, good stuff. All right.